Thank you for having me. Good morning from Rome.
Our pleasure. The FAO Food Price Index was largely unchanged in August. Can you talk to us about what factors helped stabilize prices despite global uncertainties?
Thank you for the question. Let me start by, let's say, unpacking what the FAO Food Price Index is and what is it not, all right? So, because there is quite a bit of confusion when we speak about the food price index. It is a benchmark of what food commodity prices, and I stress the word commodities, right? So, those are largely export prices bought in bulk. They are, as you mentioned, cereals, vegetable oils, meat, dairy, and sugar. The reason that the overall food price index remained unchanged was in August was that the price adjustments were not as big as we had seen in the past, and by design, those increases in the meat, sugar, and vegetable oil offset the declines in the cereals and dairy quotations. Just to give you an example of what happened, for example, in the cereal group, overall, the cereal price index was down about 1% from July, down 4% from August, but at the same time, the wheat prices declined, reflecting ample supplies in the world and relatively subdued demand. By contrast, the maize prices rose, again underpinned about the concerns what will happen to the supply considering the heat waves in Europe, and the rice prices fell. So behind the stable number, there are diverging trends across different products that are feeding into the food price index.
So the FAO forecasts record high global cereal production this year. Which crops or regions are driving this growth, and how will it affect global food security?
So the FAO revises its forecast of cereal production, consumption, trade, and stocks every month. At this time of the year, we are now in September, that forecast was prepared towards the end of August. We have a pretty good idea of what is happening with the crops on the northern hemisphere. While maize, as a significant crop, you can grow on both hemispheres. In fact, South Africa is a very important producer. Wheat, while grown on both, is mostly grown in the north. So at this time, the harvest are already close to finishing, if they haven't finished yet, depends on the local conditions. So what we did in this last forecast is that we trimmed a little bit the world output for wheat, but it is still up about 0.8% compared to last year. But at the same time, we revised the maize output, considering good forecasts for Brazil and United States of America, up. Rice production, I'm sorry, is also expected to increase a little bit. So the good news is we have plenty of supplies, all right? What is less good news is that should recall and remind our drivers, our listeners, that one of the biggest drivers of food insecurity in the world remains conflict, right? So what we can do with the conflict to lower the food insecurity globally, that would be for a separate discussion.
Right. So, how might these increases affect consumer affordability, especially in low and middle income countries, the increase in meat, sugar, rice, and vegetable oil prices?
Again, there are several aspects to the same question. So, what we talk about in the food price index are the global reference prices. So, if we look at wheat, for example, among the reference prices, you would have the export prices from the United States, export prices from the EU, from Argentina, from Russia, etc., etc. So, those are prices at the export level. What happens on the country level, even if those countries import, we need to account how much it costs to get the goods from, I don't know, the US Gulf to a certain country, right? So those costs are slightly different than the prices we are referring to. That's why we refer to the food price index as a barometer of what could be happening or what is happening on the global markets. If you go to the supermarket shopping for the weekend or on the market you shop, you might notice that the prices in your local markets are behaving differently. This could mean that the particular meat you are buying, or the type of meat, or the meat cut, is not traded, for example. So you are buying it from you might be buying it, you might choose to buy it from your local farmer, and your country, for example, for the meat market, might not be as integrated to the global economy. So if
Mm-hmm.
the prices increase, what will the consumer do? For the meat, you are likely to go for a different cut of meat. Instead of a steak, you will go for something else, which costs less. This might not be as is easily done for vegetable oils. If you use vegetable oil for cooking, it is more difficult to replace a vegetable oil. You can go for a different type, but the vegetable oils, they tend to move together. So for vegetable oils, you will just have to pay more for the vegetable oil, and then you will have less resources to buy some other goods you would want to buy.
Hmm. The report highlights rising nitrogen fertilizer costs. Could this affect future crop yields and food prices if farmers reduce usage?
At this point, we are not as concerned as we were a few years ago because the prices increased. Prices of nitrogen, by the way, are very much dependent on the energy prices because the natural gas and in some countries coal is the main input to the nitrogen production. So the prices strengthened, but we are not at the levels we were a few years ago. But what we try to highlight is that it is not enough to look only at the prices of the fertilizers, but you need to look at the ratio and those fertilizer prices in relation on how much you as a farmer are getting for your goods, for what you produce. As we observe that the commodity prices are declining, generally speaking, wheat declined, maize increased a little bit, but they are on a lower levels than they were 1 year ago. This implies that this little relationship, which for you as a farmer is important on how much you spend on your inputs and how much you get for the goods you are selling, has been worsening. So should this trend continue, we would be concerned. At this point, I would probably not be as concerned, but it's something that we should be monitoring because once the farmers significantly reduce the nitrogen application, that would have impacts on the production.
Malawi, for example, has implemented a farm input subsidy program to help reduce the fertilizer costs because of the surge in global fertilizer prices. Where smallholder farmers receive things like vouchers. Tanzania, also under the leadership of President Samia Suluhu Hassan, has its own fertilizer subsidy. Can this kind of thing prove beneficial in tackling this issue of rising fertilizer costs? I know you do say things don't look as grim as they did in previous years.
So again, I will use the same example I used with the question of what do the increased vegetable oil, meat, and sugar prices, how do they impact consumers? There is a large difference between what the farmer in Malawi or Tanzania pays for those fertilizers than the international reference prices are, right? So there
Mm.
is a certain disconnect also because you need to get the fertilizer. Many of the countries you mentioned, they do not produce enough of their own fertilizers, so they are all imported. And then we get into the question of the exchange rate volatility, how much they pay, there might be some tariffs on it, there might be some other facts that are impacting the import costs. Generally, let's say the voucher is a better idea than the subsidy because with a voucher, farmer goes to the market and purchases the goods as he or she would with money, all right? So they are not distorting the market. While if we give a direct subsidy to somebody, the person doesn't see the real cost, right? It's a cost that is somehow hidden. You are paying less. Certainly, the governments are trying to ways to help farmers so they can apply sufficient inputs or more inputs that they need, since there is a whole discussion about what is a sufficient amount of fertilizer, so they can produce enough crops, not only, let's say, with the implication of feeding a certain number of people, but also for the household, so they can support the family.
All right, we'll leave it there for today. Thank you so much for your time, Monika, and your much valuable insights.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Monika Tothova is head of the food price team at the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, or the FAO, sharing insights on the latest trends in global food prices.
From Cape to